www.hse.gov.uk. Okay, and I also visit www.oshad.ae. Okay, so these are the websites you can visit. www. So these are the websites that you can visit to carry out get information on the carrying out the risk assessment. Okay, you can include it like this as well. Okay, so now what other sources of information should I use? I also looked at the accident and ill health data of the company and looked at the method statement and SOPs. SOPs are standard operating procedures. Okay, so now I have included everything that I did for looking at the sources of information. Now, who you spoke to? You can mention I then carried out a site visit and I spoke to the site superintendent and the civil foreman, the excavator operator, mason, welder, and other workers who were working on the site. Okay. Now, how did you identify the hazards? I identified the hazards by considering the information from the sources and by talking to the site workers and observing the activity being performed. Okay, so this is how I identified the hazards. Now you need to mention how are you identified what is already being done. I also observed the workers while performing the job to understand what they are already doing. Okay. Then I need to mention how I identified any additional controls or actions may be required. While doing all this, I took my notes and then I compared what is already being done with the standard operating procedures and the requirements mentioned in the codes of practice. Wherever I thought that the risk is unacceptable, I proposed additional control measures by consulting the codes of practice and guidance document from the sources of information that I had studied. Okay, so now you have completed this section. So basically you need to address all the points that are asked. Now here what was asked? It was asked to outline how the risk assessment was carried out. Okay, and this should include sources of information you consulted, who you spoke to, and how you identified the hazards, how you identified what is already being done, and how you identified any additional control measures or action required. Okay, now here at the top you can see that you need to include how many words here? You need to include 100 to 200 words. Okay, so 100 to 200 words in this section, and let's see whether we have covered this. How many words have we mentioned here? The word count shows here, just a second, it should show at the bottom, 193 words. Okay, so you can see at the bottom here, this is 193 word, sorry, 191. So I've easily met the requirements. Okay, so you guys can keep on checking how many words have been done and how many words do you need to write further. Okay. Okay, now let's move to the next part. Okay, the next part, again, some of it I have already completed. I will just show you what to write here. Huh. Okay, so here you need to write at the top organization name, which is Al Jaber Energy Services. Okay, then you need to write the date of the assessment. What is the date of the assessment? I will put today's date, which is 28 May 2021. Scope of the risk assessment, you need to mention the area that you are assessing. FBM, sorry, I'll mention the full, Fatima bint FBM Fatima bint Muhammad Sports Academy Project Construction Site. So this is the scope of the assessment. Okay, or whatever you are, or if there's certain activities or any certain area that you are assessing, you can say that you carried out the risk assessment for, let's say, the carpentry yard at FBMA project. Okay, so you need to mention the scope of the area or the activities that you carried out the risk assessment for. Just a brief description. Scope basically means the boundaries or the limits that you have covered in the risk assessment. Now comes the important part. Now you guys need to carry out the risk assessment. This is the standard table they have given. So first you need to mention the hazard and hazard category. So in the first column, you need to mention the hazard and the hazard category. Okay. Now, when you're mentioning the hazard and the category, you need to mention the hazard categories defined in the Nebosh syllabus. So here, this is the hazard category. Okay. So this is the hazard category. Then you need to mention the hazard. This is the one which I have circled. This is the hazard. Okay, so you need to mention the hazard category and the hazard. This is the hazard category and this is the hazard itself. Okay, so this hazard categories, where will you know these hazard categories, or where will you get these hazard categories from? You will get these hazard categories from the guidance document or the book which I have given to you. So let's go to the guidance document. Okay, where is the guidance document? And let me just close this. Okay, going down to the next section, guidance documents. Okay, So this is the risk assessment part. Now you must use a table in part 2 of the risk assessment pack to complete the risk assessment. You will now need to complete a risk assessment of your organization. You must find and record at least 10 different hazards that are taken from at least 5 different hazard categories. Guys, this is very, very important to remember. So you must find and record at least how many? 10 different hazards. This is at least, which means you can find more as well. You can do 12, 13, 14, whichever you want. So it should be at least 10 different hazards that are taken from at least 5 different hazard categories. Okay, you can select even more hazard categories, but at least it should be 5 different hazard categories. For avoidance of doubt, hazard categories for this assessment are the topic headings for elements 5 to 11 in the IG syllabus as shown in the table. Okay. Okay, so here are your hazard categories. What are the hazard categories? The hazard categories in element number 5, which we covered last week, include noise, vibration, radiation, mental ill health, violence at work, substance abuse at work. In element number 6, what are the hazard categories covered? It covers work-related upper limb disorders, ergonomics, workstation design. This is one hazard category. Then you have manual handling as a second category in element 6. And the third category is load handling equipment. Element number 7 covers only one hazard category, which is hazardous substances, which could be chemical or biological hazards. Okay. Then element number 8 hazard category is health, welfare and work requirements is another hazard category. Working at height is another hazard category. Confined space is another hazard category. Lone working is another hazard category. Slips and trips is a hazard category. Movement of people and vehicles in the workplace. Work-related driving. So all of these are hazard categories. Element number 9, there is one hazard category, which is work equipment and machinery. Element 10, one hazard category, fire. And element number 11, we have one hazard category. So when you are identifying these hazard categories on the on the risk assessment, you need to include, you need to refer to this guidance document. Okay, so here you can see which hazard category have I identified here. I have identified the hazard category fire over here. Okay, now fire is the hazard category. What is the hazard? Hazard is welding being carried out near waste area which has combustible materials such as paper and wood. Okay, so what is a hazard? The hazard is, hazard category is fire. What can happen? Fire can happen. Why? What is the hazard? What will cause the fire? Welding which is being carried out near the waste area, that is the hazard itself. Okay, so this is how you need to write the hazard. Now you need to mention in the next section who might be harmed and how. So you need to mention who might be harmed and how they will be harmed. So don't only mention who will be harmed and think your job is done. No, you need to do the complete. Who might be harmed? You need to mention the people or the positions of people who will be harmed, and you need to explain how they will be harmed. Okay, how, what are the consequences they will go through. So let's just go through this. Okay, so what I mentioned here is welders, the welding foreman, welder helpers, and others working in the vicinity. These are the people who will be harmed. Okay, how will they be harmed? In case the sparks from the welding fall on the combustible material, this may cause a fire which can cause serious burns and injuries to the workers. It may even lead to a fatality if the workers are not evacuated in time. So what have I done here? I have explained who will be harmed. Okay, I mentioned who will be harmed, and I have included how they will be harmed. Okay, so we need to mention who will be harmed and how they will be harmed here. Okay, so this is very, very important. Moving on to the next column. The next column is basically what are you already doing? What are we already doing? So I've mentioned here what we are already doing. The welders are trained in welding safety. Good. The welders are being supervised by a welding foreman, and welders are being are using protective clothing such as fire resistant aprons and fire resistant clothes. Okay, so this is what is going on at the moment. Okay, now at the moment, whatever you are doing, you need to judge whether it is sufficient or not. In my opinion, it is insufficient, so we need to propose additional control measures. Okay, so let's find out where we need to write further controls or actions. So in this column, we will include the further controls or actions that are required. Okay, now when you are doing this, when you are proposing these controls, you need to remember the hierarchy of controls. Guys, do you remember the hierarchy of controls? Who can tell me? Can anybody tell me the hierarchy of control? Does anybody remember?
Plan, do, check, act.
Now the hierarchy of control starts with
Elimination.
Evacuation. Elimination.
Okay, so let's just refresh our knowledge on the hierarchy of controls. Okay, let's go back to the hierarchy of controls, and let me just share my screen with you for the presentation in which we discuss this. Element number 3.
Elimination and substitutions, engineering control, administrative control.
Exactly, very important. So let me take you to that slide just to refresh this. So that's why it's important to keep referring to the presentations. Okay. So hierarchy of control, there it is. Let me just share the screen with you guys. Okay, and you share this slide. Okay, can you see it now? The hierarchy of controls?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
So first of all, how will we propose the control measures? We will consider whether we can eliminate this hazard. We'll consider elimination. Is it possible to eliminate the hazard? Then we will consider substitution. Eliminate. How can we eliminate the hazard? We can mention do not allow any welding activities to be carried out near combustible material. So that is considered elimination. Substitution is by replacing it with something which is less hazardous. Okay, so in this case, I don't think substitution is possible. Then you can look at engineering controls. Isolation and total enclosure. Is it possible? Yes, you can do that by providing a welding shelter. Okay, a welding shelter is basically it is a housing, it is a hood in which you can carry out the welding, and the sparks will not go outside that welding hood or welding shelter. It's like a small tent. It's a small tent built by a fire blanket, fire resistant material. So you can provide isolation or total enclosure. If not, you can provide separation or segregation. How? You can say that all welding activities must be carried out away from combustible material at least 15 or 20 meters. Okay, then you can consider partial enclosure. In this case, it might not be possible. Is there any safety devices which we can provide? Not in this situation. Maybe we can look at some administrative controls. Can we do any safe system of work? Yes. Make sure the permit to work system is available. In the existing controls, there was no mention of permit to work system. Okay. Yes, Puneet, go ahead, please.
Yes, regarding the safety devices, can we provide the extinguishers and fire blankets and other equipments for the
Basically, it's not considered a safety device. A safety device will be something which changes the design. Okay. A safety device is, for example, in a vehicle, you have the speed limiting device. That is a safety device. Or you have on moving parts on a saw or other moving parts, you put a cover over it, you put a guard over it. So these guards, safety guards, are considered safety devices as well. Any emergency stop alarm. So they are fixed.
What about
Exactly.
air monitor? Air gas monitor.
Yeah. So then we can do next administrative controls. Safety device, if it was being carried out in a workshop, if welding was being carried out in a workshop, you could consider the smoke detectors or smoke alarm as a safety device. Okay, so you could consider that as a safety device or a heat detector.
Okay.
Okay. Next is administrative control, safe system work. Yes, definitely you need to mention permit to work. Then reduce exposure. Reducing exposure does not work here because that is different. That is for job rotation. Currently, we're talking about fire happening, so that does not apply here. Reduce time of exposure dosage, that does not. Yes, information. Provide adequate training. Sorry. Provide adequate training to the workers. So information, this is, you can mention toolbox talk, you can provide counseling, you can provide training. This is also an administrative control. So make sure all welders are trained. Okay. Supervision, make sure site supervisor is available. You can also assign a fire watch. Okay. A fire watch is also a administrative control. Okay. So, and then you can provide fire extinguishers, then you can provide welding gloves. Finally, you will provide the personal protective equipment. This is already provided in the existing controls. Okay. So fire extinguishers, etc., and fire watch, these you can provide at the very last in the end as administrative controls. Okay, guys, so this is how you will propose the additional controls, and you must mention the hierarchy of controls. This is very, very important because the examiner will consider it. Okay. Okay, now coming back to the sheet here. What have I mentioned? Yes, what I mentioned is all combustible material to be removed, elimination from the vicinity of the area where welding is being carried out. So next is substitution we cannot do. So engineering control is isolation. Use a welding hood to limit the spark of the welding within the confined space. Within the confines, or use a blanket to prevent. Within the confined area, it's a confined area, it's a congested area. Let's mention congested area instead of confined, because confined space holds a different meaning. So use a welding hood to limit the sparks of welding within the congested area. Use a fire blanket and prevent sparks from flying around in the area. Then we move to administrative controls. We use a permit to work system to issue PTW for all welding activities. Okay. Then ensure proper housekeeping is carried out in the area. Provide a fire extinguisher in the area for welding is being carried out. Provide firefighting training to the welding crew. And did I mention what else did I carry out toolbox talk? So we have almost considered everything. Carry out TBT with all workers. Fire watch. Provide a fire watch to supervise or monitor the hot works. So now you have mentioned all the control measures that are required to manage this activity. Now, by putting in place all these control measures, we have reduced the risk to an acceptable level. Now, what is the next part? The next part is also very, very important. Don't forget about it. You need to give time scales for further action, for the actions to be completed. So the time scale is within 1 day, within 1 week, within 1 week, within 1 day, within 2 days. Now you need to make sure that you provide a separate timeline for every action. So first action is all combustible materials are to be removed, and then you need to give in front of it what is the time. Okay, and also then you need to mention the responsible person title, job title. So who is going to carry out this action? In this case, who is going to make sure that the welding material is removed? The welding foreman will do that. Then is using a welding hood. Welding hood, it will take 1 week to procure a welding hood because it's not available in the store. So we put 1 week over here. Who will do this? Welding supervisor. Use a permit to work. Permit to work is not existing, so then we need to give it 1 week for implementing a permit to work system. Who will implement this? The area manager. Ensure housekeeping is done. 1 day, welding crew will do this. Provide fire extinguisher, 2 days, safety officer. So for each action, you need to make sure that you have a time scale and a responsible person. A time scale and responsible person. And they should be aligned, okay? It shouldn't be like some people make a mistake. Let me show you what mistake people make. What will some people do? Some people will write over here, they will only write project manager, okay? And they will do it for the whole, all the actions. So project manager, they will put him responsible for all the actions, which is wrong, okay? So if you just put one name in this section, you will lose marks. Not marks, you will not meet the criteria and you will fail, okay? Even on this one single mistake, the examiner will fail you. So don't just write one name. You need to write a name against each timeline, against each action, okay? So be very, very responsible when you're doing this, okay? So make sure that you
Can we write a name for 2 actions?
yes, you can do that. You can write like this: welding supervisor. If you give numbering, for example, 1 and the other example 2, but time limit, time we should be separate for each action, okay? Let me 4. So you can do numbering of these actions, and you can say instead of mentioning the welding supervisor again, we will say welding foreman action 1 and 2, okay? So now we can know, now we can see that the welding foreman, he will do action number 1 and action number 2. Similarly, you can write with the other areas as well. You can mention one person to carry out 2, 3 actions. It doesn't matter, okay? But the best way is to do it like I did it earlier, okay? So make sure that you have a completed a timeline for each action and a responsible person for each action. Make sure they are aligned, okay? They should be in line. If they're not in line, then the person checking it, he will struggle, okay? So now I have given one example. I won't go through all 10 hazards. I've just given you one example how to complete it for one. Now what you need to do, you need to identify at least 10 hazards, okay? At least 10 hazards like this. From how many categories? From at least 5 hazard categories like this, okay? So now let me take you to the next section. Okay, so fire, what I have done next, hazardous substances is the next hazard category. Working closely in the workshop, exposed to COVID-19, blah, blah, blah. Then you can complete the rest. Then I've considered work-related upper limb disorders, regular use of computer screen by office staff, that's another. So here you can see the pattern, see the flow, okay? So again, you can see this is the hazard, okay? So this is the hazard category, and this is the hazard itself. Okay, so what is the hazard? Regular use of computer screens by the office staff in the workshop. Hazard category is work-related upper limb disorders. Okay, then you need to mention who will be harmed and how and all that. Okay, just like we discussed before. So keep on doing it like this, and you need to identify at least 10 hazards. Fire, again, workers were found smoking, hazardous substances again, paint is being used. 6 again hazardous substance in fumes. So similarly, you need to identify at least 10 hazards. Okay.